What is happening, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review Steven Soderbergh's new movie, No Sudden Move, which dropped today on HBO Max. This is a heavily plot-driven crime story with shitloads of double crosses, so I'm going to be keeping this review spoiler-free in that the twists and turns are a massive part of what the movie has to offer. I had hoped to see this movie a few weeks ago during the Tribeca Film Festival, and I bought an online festival pass just to see this movie, but it ended up being the only movie you had to attend in person, and it sold out well in advance of when I tried to snag a ticket, so I was a little bitter at the time. In any event, Soderbergh is one of the most prolific directors of the last 30 years in both film and television, and I've seen most of his work due to this giant podcast I did on his career with my friends Jacob Rivera and Matthias van der Roost, and I'll leave a link to that discussion in the show notes below. But over the years, Soderbergh's taken a crack at just about every conceivable genre, but more often than not, I lean toward his crime films, movies like Out of Sight, Logan Lucky, and my personal favorite of his work, The Limey. Also, if you want to hear some insights by Soderbergh into the making of The Limey, check out the commentary track for John Boorman's Point Blank, where Soderbergh basically showers Boorman with praise, talking about all the things that he stole from Point Blank and then put into The Limey. But in that No Sudden Move is a crime story. Naturally, this movie grabbed my attention as soon as I saw the trailer, especially since it reunites Soderbergh with so many of his legendary collaborators that he's worked with multiple times, actors like Don Cheadle and Benicio del Toro, as well as music composer David Holmes, who I've been a fan of ever since I first saw Out of Sight. As far as the story goes, in broad strokes, this crime thriller begins as a caper movie set in Detroit in 1954. Several crooks are brought together for a routine kidnapping case, which turns out to be part of a much larger conspiracy involving all the major automobile manufacturers in the area who are trying to manipulate the future of their industry. And I must admit that Ed Solomon's script for me was not the chief attraction of the movie. I thought the story was fine, but not exemplary. But what can't be denied is that this is a strong contender for the best ensemble cast you will see in anything all year, because a lot of these actors are veterans from some of the best crime films of the 1990s, which for me is one of the best decades in the history of the genre. You've got Ray Liotta from Goodfellas, Don Cheadle from Out of Sight, Benicio del Toro from The Usual Suspects. That alone would be enough for me. But Soderbergh also rounds out his cast with Matt Damon, Bill Duke, John Hamm, Kieran Culkin, David Harbour, Brendan Fraser, and an actress who's been making steam rise off my bald head ever since I first saw her in Uncut Gems, the very sexy Julia Fox. And if, like me, you've got a bit of a crush, make sure you hunt down Private Chat, which came out earlier this year. But all celebrity crushes aside, the big question is whether or not folks should carve out time to watch this. We live in this era of total media saturation where so many shows and movies feel disposable and forgettable, and I really try hard not to waste anyone's time with my suggestions, and I would love nothing more than to be able to report that this is Soderbergh at the top of his game, but unfortunately I cannot. I definitely enjoyed it, I was on the hook, but I didn't love it. Probably because the script is largely lacking in the humor and the sense of fun that characterize so many of Soderbergh's other crime films. I imagine that this flick is going to have a lot more appeal to Soderbergh's diehard fans who've been sticking with him since the days of Sex, Lies, and Videotape, one of my personal faves. And it really is incredible to me that Soderbergh has managed to stay in the game at this level for so many years. Very few of his peers from the late 80s and early 90s who exploded onto the indie film scene at that time have managed to do so. I mean, you've got the Coen brothers and Quentin Tarantino and Richard Linklater and Robert Rodriguez, but there are not a lot of people from that period who are left that are still actively making movies. And at the time, I thought Soderbergh had reached his peak when he had two movies nominated for Best Picture at the same time in 2001, Traffic and Erin Brockovich, but he was just getting warmed up. His output has just been insane, and yet each time he prematurely retires, he always bounces back with another movie or another show that demands our attention. I had the utmost respect for him, whether you're talking his more experimental films like Schizopolis and Grey's Anatomy, not that stupid show, but The Monologue by Spalding Gray, or his big budget stuff like the Ocean's 11 series, or his more recent projects like Unsane, which he shot entirely on the iPhone 7 Plus. He's never content to rest on his laurels. He's always innovating and experimenting and always trying to explore fresh frontiers. And speaking of filmmaking technique, the nerds out there will appreciate Soderbergh's extensive use of the wide-angle lens in this film. At times, it almost feels like we're watching the film in this giant fishbowl, or what's otherwise known as barrel distortion. And I studied this effect in college in the films of Stanley Kubrick, but I can't remember Soderbergh using this look so extensively in any of his other movies. But long story short, it gives the movie a cool, interesting look that sets it apart from Soderbergh's other movies. The movie looks great on the whole, especially shots like this shot of Don Cheadle, where he looks totally badass, where he's waking a dude up with a gun in his belly. Cheadle's character in this is one bad dude, and overall he does a great job, but if I were to offer one criticism, he might have leaned a little too far into this accent that he cooked up for the movie. It's a cool character, but I found the accent to be a little distracting, especially after seeing Don Cheadle in so many movies over the years. But it looks like most of the cast in this movie is having a blast. Kieran Culkin's particularly good, even though it's a little tough to tell this character apart from his role in Succession, in spite of the fact that those two characters couldn't be more different on the surface. And there were a few two legit double crosses that caught me off guard in the film. So maybe I'm being a little too harsh on this movie. What it reminds me of is a lot of the second tier film noirs of the late 40s and early 50s. We're not talking about the best of the best, movies like Out of the Past or Kiss Me Deadly, but something that's just overall very solid, very enjoyable. Also, we live in this era where mid-budget movies with great casts have kind of become an endangered species. So as someone who wants these kinds of movies to thrive and flourish and continue to get made, I will applaud HBO Max for getting behind this project. That's about as far as I can go without ruining the story, so I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Hope you enjoyed my review. If so, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, yada yada yada, and you can always hunt me down on Twitter at Geekin' Out. But thank you so much for watching this. I really appreciate it, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.